Mr. Veeder. Putting a merciful end to the smothering silence that had filled the car since the thoughtful but disastrous s'mores invitation, Mr. Limb and Mr. Skirret dropped Lourdes off at her house, which had pretty flowers in the yard. Then they drove along the edge of Tuscarora Woods to Oscar's home. "We'll see you around, kid," said Mr. Skirret as they rolled to a stop in his driveway. "Yeah, we'll give you regular news updates from Professor Smiley," added Mr. Limb. "Thanks for the ride, Mr. Limb and Mr. Skirret," said Oscar. "I wish everybody we kidnapped was as polite as you," said Mr. Limb. "And hey, kid, don't take things so serious-like," said Mr. Skirret. "Yeah, sure, you got yourself mixed up in something big, something so colossal it might spell the end of existence as we know it. But that doesn't mean you can't make s'mores with your friends once in a while." "You guys shouldn't eavesdrop on other people's conversations," cried Oscar. "Sorry," said Mr. Skirret. "Old habits die hard, but keep my advice in mind." "I'll try to do that," said Oscar, hoisting Dr. Soul, who'd made himself into cat jelly in an attempt to slip out of his grasp. "We're driving down to the headquarters of NASA," said Mr. Skirret, "to pick up Professor Smiley's surfboard from his old office, just in case he spots the wave that will reveal what he's looking for and decides to rush into the sea to ride it." "See you in the funny papers," added Mr. Limb, and the Cadillac roared away in a cloud of blue smoke. An idea popped into Oscar's mind. In order to find out where the watch was now, he thought it might help to learn about where it had been. He sprinted around to the back of his house, placed Dr. Soul gently inside, and ran to the garage for his bicycle. So what if Oscar's bike was a hand-me-down from his cousin Julia, who'd outgrown it? So what if Julia was only 11 and the bike was 3 sizes too small for him? So what if it was pink with tassels in the hand grips? So what if Julia had left it lying in the driveway and his uncle had backed over the front wheel so it wobbled like it belonged on the last cart in the whole grocery store? It had only taken Oscar 10 seconds to snip off the tassels, 3 minutes to bang the wheel almost totally around with a wooden hammer, and 6 more minutes to paint a black stripe around the crossbar, making it look really fast. And even though one pedal was slightly loose, it was fast, especially going downhill. Riding it, perhaps Oscar might forget for a moment that he'd broken the universe and lost the first real friend he'd made in years, and that if he didn't find the watch, everyone he knew would suffer and pay. Riding his bike, Oscar felt free. He felt confident. Sure, he had his work cut out for him, but he was going to fix things. He just knew it. On his way out of the garage, he listened for bees in the bee bush, but they were gone. Another sign that the universe was collapsing. "Don't worry, bees. Wherever you are," said Oscar, "I'm going to fix everything." He had a plan. Oscar pedaled along streets of crumbling asphalt and potholes that would flatten his tires and bend his rims if he wasn't careful, right to the middle of town. There, straddling the invisible, imaginary line that divided East Mount Edna from West Mount Edna, almost in the shadow of Mount Edna Diamond, stood the Veeder Clam Thimble and Handheld Timepiece Museum. Oscar figured if he needed more information on the mysterious watch he'd just used to destroy the universe, he should trace its whereabouts back to the moment when it disappeared from the museum, its rightful home. The sign out front read, "Open 9 to 5 every day." Old Mr. Veeder didn't have much to do besides run his museum, and even when it was closed, he could usually be found there because he lived on the 2nd floor. Strangely, though, when Oscar tried the door, it was locked. He knocked. "We're closed, Oscar," cried Mr. Veeder from inside. "Congratulations on your home run. Now go home." "You have to let me in," insisted Oscar. "And thanks for the congratulations," he added, although his shoulders sagged a bit, because that home run was really starting to feel like a burden. "Why do I have to let you in?" asked Mr. Veeder. I need information, said Oscar from the front steps. About what? Asked Mr. Veeder. The watch, said Oscar. I have a lot of watches, replied Mr. Veeder. Thimbles, too. Did you notice the name of my museum? This is a watch you don't have, said Oscar. This is the watch that disappeared from its vault in your basement. This is the watch that halts. Shh! Hissed Mr. Veeder, hurriedly opening the door. He glanced up and down the street but saw nobody. Come inside, he ordered. Oscar entered the museum. Now what kind of nonsense are you talking about? Demanded Mr. Veeder, closing the door behind Oscar. He was not the most patient man ever to run a museum, and today he seemed even grumpier than usual. Probably, Oscar noted, another sign of the deteriorating universe. I want to know about that watch that can stop time, replied Oscar. The one you used to have locked up for safekeeping. I've been hearing that hogwash for years, snapped Mr. Veeder. There never was such a watch, and even if there was, I never heard of it. And even if I'd heard of it, I certainly never had anything like that stored in a secret vault in my museum. And even if I had something like that stored in a secret vault in my museum, it certainly didn't disappear recently. Why do you ask? It's missing. I'm trying to find it, said Oscar. I accidentally used it. Oh, my goodness, said Mr. Veeder, and the fight seemed to leak out of him. You did? I still claim no such watch exists, but if it did exist, and if it disappeared from my vault, you're saying you activated it? Yes, said Oscar. I used it last night, and then it disappeared from my bread box this morning. Very upsetting, said Mr. Veeder. And Professor T. Buffington Smiley says I need to get it back before someone uses it again, said Oscar. Professor Smiley is right. You do need to get that watch back pronto before somebody else uses it, agreed Mr. Veeder, finally admitting he knew what Oscar was talking about. I want to find it more than anything in the universe, said Oscar, but I don't even know where to start. Can you help me, Mr. Veeder? The story of that watch is classified, top secret, said Mr. Veeder. Only highly placed government officials, special investigators, and certain museum directors are supposed to know about it. So no, I can't tell you. Mr. Veeder, said Oscar, the fate of the universe is at stake. I know I look like just a kid to you, and I am, but the thing is, I'm the kid who made a cosmic mistake last night, and I'm also the kid who is going to fix that mistake. Mr. Veeder silently contemplated Oscar's declaration. After a long pause, he said, These are extraordinary circumstances, and I believe they justify breaking the rules. Oscar, that watch is one of the most powerful scientific devices ever invented. You must know that. If you've already spoken to Professor Smiley, the watch is so powerful, it is dangerous. So dangerous it was banished to an uncrackable vault in this very museum, in this very obscure town where no one would ever think to look for it. And it's stayed here, ever since, in the Veeder Clam Thimble and Handheld Timepiece Museum. Who would make such a powerful and dangerous watch? Asked Oscar. A man who wanted to save the world, said Mr. Veeder. A brilliant one. His name was Hector Smiley. Is he related to T. Buffington Smiley? Asked Oscar. Indeed, he was T. Buffington Smiley's great-uncle, said Mr. Veeder. No wonder Professor Smiley is so smart, said Oscar. But what if this Smiley guy was so brilliant